Okay.
Hello, I'm here with Laura Wharton, resident of Jerusalem, member of Jerusalem City Council, class of 1983, and also importantly, my aunt. Laura, thanks,
Yeah.
thanks
Hello.
for
Hi.
dialing in.
Good to see you, Sam. Great to
So
see you.
I appreciate it. So, I mean, obviously, living in Jerusalem with, many children who've been serving, and obviously, pretty close to the situation that has been going on in Israel since 10/7. I'm kind of
Hmm.
curious. I mean, there's obviously the long conversation about the Israeli side of this and the Israel side. I'm
Hmm.
really curious to hear, specifically about your reactions to what you've seen on the US side at college campuses generally, but really specifically at Harvard also since
Hmm.
10/7, how the university responded, what do you think has gone well or not, and maybe start there.
Okay. Well, I'll start by saying I was horrified at the things I was hearing and seeing, both because they were so uh, uh, harsh and nasty and angry and full of hate and ignorant. I mean, clearly a lot of people yelling, from the river to the sea have no idea what that meant. But that meant, the annihilation of the country I live in, myself, my family, and everyone I know, all 10 million of us, Jews and Arabs alike. Um, but also, it was terrible to see the fierceness of this hate, which I don't think comes from anywhere. Well, I can guess where it comes from, but isn't based on any understanding of the situation, isn't based on um, uh, familiarity with even the phrases they were shouting.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of ignorance, when it's tied into all these, passionate, very negative feelings, is a terrible thing. And I would expect that a university would be aspiring, at least, both to make sure that the public was informed, um, at least the public of the students, make sure that they had a certain amount of humility about the complexity of things, and
Hmm.
also would be working more from their brains and their intellect rather than the whatever passions, anger they had.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious. I mean, you've written very eloquently in the Times of Israel about, and you were pretty far
Thanks.
left
Hmm.
and like somewhat of an activist when you were at Harvard yourself. I'm kind of curious how you think about, you know, what you experienced in the 80s, right, in the late 70s and 80s, and kind of what you participated in, and kind of the culture of speech then versus kind of what it looked like at the university today in 2023.
Hmm. Well, I must say, in retrospect, maybe I saw the beginnings of, the of some of the things that we see today, or they're much more horrible. And I tried to fight with them. Although I've, belonged to the left all my life, I'm not in favor of war. I have tremendous sympathy for the Palestinians in Gaza who've kind of been taken hostage by these murderers, this, government of terrorists. But um, when I was there in the 80s, I came in 1980, I was shocked to see, when the war in Lebanon broke out, both the propaganda that was being spread in Harvard, in the campus, and also in Harvard Square. And I can give you example of the things that I saw. I saw there were leaflets being handed out on campus about opposing the Israeli Nazis' incursion into Lebanon, which stunned me, especially because already then I had friends who were serving in the army. My closest friend, who was injured in the war, and I know even better that the people in the north were being showered with missiles from Lebanon, and the army, which is supposed to defend the population, that's a basic responsibility of the government, responded. Now, I agree there was an over response. They, shouldn't have done a lot of the things they did in Lebanon. But this idea that Israelis and Jews were seeking out as Nazis to, eliminate the Lebanese or something was an outrage that upset me. Even then, again, even though I'm left wing and I'm sympathetic and I'm for minimizing civilian damage, the things that were being written were terrible. And I can actually now confess, since it was 40 years ago, that when a friend of mine, a Jewish friend of mine, and I saw posters around campus and in Cambridge saying something to this effect: "Stop the Jewish Nazis invading Lebanon," we went around at night with spray paint and got to them. Fortunately, it was kind of a passing thing, and the war ended, and so forth. But maybe that was a nascent, movement of ignorance that should have been dealt with not just by friends of mine and myself, but by the administration.
Yeah, so talk to me about, I'm kind of curious about the administrative response, then versus now. 'Cause I mean, to speak my truth on this, I mean, I actually am a pretty hardcore free speech advocate, right? And I do think that, within a very, very wide range, like free speech is good. The thing that has kind of been extremely frustrating for me to see since 10/7 is kind of the inconsistency of the application of policy, right? And how the administration has been extremely harsh on students saying certain types of things, right? And clearly, in very well documented cases, very much limited speech on campus, but then choose in this moment to be very hands off, right? And kind of claim free speech. So I'm kind of curious, one, if that resonates with you as well, and you see the same thing, and then two, kind of how you've seen the evolution of that, or think about that today versus kind of what it was years ago.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I definitely think that one of the most offensive things about what's been going on, from what I've read about, I must say I haven't been in Harvard Yard in a long time, is the hypocrisy. That they say it's okay to say, genocide for Jews, or kill the Jews, annihilate Israel, but you can't say anything that would be considered cultural appropriation, or you can't say anything that has to do with race or gender or anything else, but this is allowed. And I think either the policy, either policies against free speech and all kinds of other things should be loosened, or what I think would be better is that there be a clear distinction between, or a line drawn between free speech and a call to violence. Certainly, calls against groups in general are offensive. I mean, I think if people were to say, instead of kill the Jews, kill the, I don't know, Botswanians or something, there would be an outcry. So I think there are three things that have to be dealt with. One is the uniformity of the application of whatever laws there are. Second, dealing with and a serious thinking about what is incitement to racism or incitement against any particular ethnic group or any group at all. It could be, let's kill the green-eyed people, And the third would be, and maybe that's an overlap here, something against violence, because a lot of what was being said is a call to violence. And I can say from my own home in Israel, we have very free speech laws. Usually, I mean, we're a model. I remember the British are considered having one. We had British professors coming to learn about how our laws work about free speech, although I must say under war they have taken a turn for the worse. But even there, and even in Great Britain and other places, I know there are laws against incitement to violence. And a lot of things I was saying were incitement to violence.
100%. I mean, it's free speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building.
Right, exactly. You have to use your brain some of the time. Exactly.
Not complicated. Yes. Very interesting. So when you think about kind of like the path forward, I mean, again, the university has had a terrible fall. Like the administration has clearly failed, right, repeatedly, and it's hurt Harvard in all sorts of ways, right? As a university, and my kind of take is that I think while a lot of people I know are just saying, forget Harvard, it's lost, go focus on other causes, those guys, there's no path back for it. I kind of am trying to invest because I think it actually does matter, right? It's kind of an image of, the top of American education, a global brand, like it's letting it go in a direction that, is clearly bad, and letting the administration, lead it there is like, something we have to kind of work on and fight. But I'm kind of curious, like when you think forward to like 2024 and beyond, what are the most important steps you think the university needs to be taking? I mean, it is clearly clarifying and then enforcing consistently rules around speech and the speech culture. And I think you probably agree, and tell me if you don't, that like another key piece of that is obviously like you shouldn't be disrupting classes. Like it's an academic university, right? And I know in
Definitely.
your day there were plenty of, I believe, sit-ins, right, in Harvard Hall, right,
Yes, yes,
the
yes.
administrative buildings. But I actually don't know, like, how disruptive was the class situation in that era?
Hmm.
Were
Well,
classes getting disrupted a lot, or no?
no, I must say, I mean, I lived in the Dudley Co-op, which was the center of SDS, the Students for
Yeah,
Democratic Society, that was, a hothouse for radical behavior. And I think they occupied, some administration building and stuff. That was before my time. So I
fair
don't know
enough.
what went on then, but I was like a generation or so afterwards. And although in the co-op I lived in, we had a lot of activists. I don't recall that anyone was ever allowed to do anything that would upset studies. I mean, that's what the
Yeah,
university is there to do. And I think that should be a red line. That should not be allowed in any way. If you want to, talk in the middle of the park, then the police can deal with that. But I think the university should be protecting its students and the studies and the professors and keeping, as nearly sacred the ongoing
and
study.
yeah,
So that would be another thing. But I think the hypocrisy issue, the violence issue, and also the incitement should be stopped
yeah. Anything else you
against
think the
everyone.
university should do? That's it. We're done. Just fix those three problems and we're good.
Um, um, I'm not enough in touch with what goes on a daily basis, but I think that it's very important that students really be better informed about a lot of things. And I don't know what the university does, but I think all universities should be doing more, both about specific issues as they arrive, but also they should be sending a clear message about what political activism is and what political awareness is, and guidelines about getting, diverse opinions, as you are doing now, which I think is a great thing, getting perspective on things, and making sure that there are channels and ways for students to be made aware and get reliable information about things that are going on. I might also mention that one body that I was active in that I think was important at the time was the Kennedy School, the
Yeah.
Institute of Politics. And I don't know if that is made any use of as a platform, but I think, that body, that institution could be used and do things like to invite a forum to have intelligent, informed discussions about things that concern people on campus. I can give an example. When I was at Harvard, I remember the question of capital punishment was a big issue that was being determined. So I remember I helped actually form a panel to have an intellectual discussion with partners from different sides to discuss these things in an intelligent and responsible way. And maybe that's happening now, but I think it should probably be happening more because the as I said, both the violence, the lack of intellectual basis, and the activism that is so negative and so divisive and so scary should be addressed.
Let me ask one last question because I think it leads into it, and then we'll stop because I know we're going long, but I
Okay.
appreciate it. It's like
Mhm.
the other thing that it's interesting to me is, I mean, I don't know how much you have spent time thinking about this kind of general oppressor-oppressed narrative, right? That
Mhm.
seems to be, central to a lot of this, right? The idea
Mhm.
that there's that's kind of the new framework that a lot of is being applied. And like we'd love to say it's just students, it's candidly like a lot of the academics as well. Like this has become like a direction of study and inquiry. I'm kind of curious, like if you have like a gut reaction to that as well, because you talk about like creating forums, and I wonder how much an intellectual diversity, I do wonder with that as a framework, it's so rigid to lead the question, right? Like how much even you can discuss, right? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't quite understand the question about oppressors and
Well,
oppressed, about
yeah, I mean, I think
framing things this way.
there's this narrative that effectively oppressors are always wrong and the oppressed are always right, right?
Hmm.
And to me this is ridiculous because it's exactly the same thing as saying might is always right, which is
Hmm.
clearly wrong, just
But
inverting it, and there
yeah,
and
might is not always wrong. Yes,
might
yes.
is not always wrong, right? But
Yeah.
if I guess the question you talk about like creating forums and having broader conversations and informed conversations, I do wonder if that is like a legitimate form of academic study now and belief, which I think is driving a lot of what's going on campus. Again, it's a longer conversation, but I'm wondering like if that's such a rigid framework, it's just impossible to have informed conversation because that philosophy is so degenerate, right? That like you can't. There's almost no conversation to have, right?
Mhm.
In that context.
No, I think it's something that should be discussed, and this, might makes wrong way of thinking is very problematic. And I think that in general, the a lot should be talked about other ways of framing things, um, uh, not just about the might issues, but about other issues. For example, um, you know, there was a time when things were discussed about. There were discussions of, there's the great book um, by what's his name, Michael Walzer, Just and
Hmm.
Unjust Wars and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And there are questions about when and how there should be interventions and what you can allow a government to do its people without getting involved. And I think this is something that has to be discussed more seriously, not only internally, but externally.
yeah,
Um, so that when you're, let's say, evaluating an oppressed people, like the Palestinians in Gaza, how much can you take into consideration the fact that the government itself is, let's say, deeply problematic at best. They haven't had
yeah,
elections since 2006. So I think the oppressor oppressed thing is something that should definitely be addressed. And it used to be, as I said, when
yeah,
Just and Unjust Wars came out, both on an international level, but also an internal, because they tie into one another. Like if you know that you have a barbarous government, not only what does that mean about categorizing that government, but what does it mean about international responsibility? And then what does it mean when one of these, monstrosities becomes an aggressor?
yeah, 100%.
So, so yes, I think it's something that should be addressed, but I think, there are ways to do it, and we've just put them aside because they're, they've fallen out of popularity, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, make
so
them popular again. Anyway,
yeah, yeah, bring them
Laura,
back. So,
thank you for dialing in and for chatting about this stuff.
okay.
Big issues,
Uh-huh.
and I appreciate it.
Okay.
And I
Well,
appreciate the
thank you
support.
very much for talking to me. And also, I think your idea is a great one for running for the overseers. And I hope that works. And I will do what all I can to help you. It'll be easier once I'm back home. But lots of luck.
Thanks so much, Lara.
All right. Take care.